A pleasure to meet all at last, and welcome back to HGN Season 3. And for another piece of Bandtastic, what we're going to do is talk about a well-known new wave and synth-based band from the early 80s. Well, at least this was when they were considered most popular, called Devo. Originally founded in 1973, and having members like Mark Mothersbaugh. Yeah, that's his name, Mothersbaugh. Well, this band themselves, they became quite famous back in the day, especially in the early to mid-80s. Not just for their notable outfits consisting of yellow jumpsuits and their signature red caps. Yeah, that was quite a time to be alive. And it was also common practice back then where masked singers or performers or even entire bands, I mean, surely you probably recognize some people like Insane Clown Posse or Motorhead or Kiss, or if you really want to get technical in more recent years, Daft Punk. Of course, we know that costumed performers when it comes to music, even today, it does happen. I mean, have you seen the show The Masked Singer? Well, I suggest you check it out at some point. It just shows that it's still a welcome tradition out there in the world of music, and that sporting a certain fashion can actually make you stand out from the crowd and possibly give you even more attention than you realize. I mean, look at how Daft Punk got so big overnight. But that's a whole different story. One I'm sure I'll save for another piece at some point, but back to Devo though. They became well known in 1980 with their single Whip It, which also spawned a music video by that point. But other notable singles that they've made over the years would include Beautiful World, Big Mess, Gates of Steel, Freedom of Choice, and a ton of others here and there. Of course, like lots of bands that I've talked about in this series, I actually have some of their work right here on my phone. And well, of course we know that Greatest Hits, which is basically a compilation of their best works. Though, guess what? In 1990, they also released an album called Greatest Misses. This actually considers their worst works. That's something I've never seen before. A compilation of their worst works ever made, or basically ones that had low reviews on them all across the board. Well, I mean, I'm probably considering downloading that as well. If only it wasn't for that explicit material in there. Of course, you probably just noticed that there was another album that I had on here that came out more recently. Something for Everybody, 2010. Well, if you're probably familiar with the film adaptation based on Nerf's Secret Revealed known as Bolts of Intrigue, then well, 3 songs by Devo were actually featured in the soundtrack. Of course, the YouTube saved version of Bolts of Intrigue that you can find here on my channel will not include any of this stuff. But then again, it seems that copyrighted tracks have been allowed all across the board, especially with Hot Wheels Hilarity. But that itself is a whole different series of mine that I've gotten. But then again, pretty much, this is a while after Nerf's Secret Revealed Bolts of Intrigue came out. And I'm sure YouTube will probably be a little more lenient on that part, allowing copyrighted material to pass on my channel, even if it means including entire songs worth. But the thing is that 3 singles from Devo are in the soundtrack to Nerf's Secret Revealed Bolts of Intrigue 2021. And these songs are in fact Freedom of Choice, Big Mess, and Don't Shoot. And I suggest you check them all out. They are both amazing pieces for their entirety, and most importantly, for Devo's signature new wave and synthesizer-based series of rockin' tunes, you know. This was that particular turning point in history where, by the early 80s, synthesizers started to get more common and was a placement in most music. And while artificial tunes were being pumped through the speakers as a complement to the singing ballads and other such vocal tones, especially when you take into consideration that some artists out there like Whitney Houston or Cyndi Lauper, for instance, these two, alongside millions of other singers here and there, they definitely became rather big in the 80s. And just for the fact that there were lots of people who were willing to help compose various scores to accompany the vocals, the 80s sure were quite a time to be alive in. might not have been a time in my life, but I could probably be more than just memorable with it now that I have understood about the history of the decade entirely. But overall, knowing Devo and knowing how I'll probably continue to use them as a piece of my own work, even after Bolts of Intrigue already had 3 instances of their work make an appearance at some point, I'd still go as far to say that Devo can and will have more inclusion within my own work. And in the same way that Devo has actually made more appearances in pop culture, aside from my own, they've made at least one known appearance in Futurama and another in Family Guy, and I'm sure there's more of them out there that I have yet to find out. But I also recall them being in the Netflix film Rim of the World, where their song Girl You Want appears sort of at the beginning of the movie. But hey, Rim of the World, as I've said in Films I Should Have Talked About years ago, Season 1, was definitely not Stranger Things. They definitely did a bad job with that part. But it still was a pretty decent film if you consider the fact that it probably used Stranger Things as its own direct inspiration. But yeah, I know I'm getting a little off track here. There's just so much that I could do to talk about Devo entirely. And Mark Mothersbaugh himself has actually become a pretty decent composer. Like when he made the soundtrack to Thor Ragnarok. But I'm not a fan of the MCU. Surely you know that by now. Anyways though, I feel like I've gone on so many pathways with Devo, and all these works that I've mentioned, it more than covers the band entirely for this series. And so, I'm going to be back tomorrow with another piece, and surely, I hope you'll appreciate it.